Hey, I'm TuxFu, and this is my series on taking back control of your computing, your freedom and privacy on the internet, and computing in general. So this video will be looking at setting up your own home server. Through your own home server, you'll be able to host your own websites and various services such as Nextcloud, so that you can get rid of Google Docs and Google Drive and have your own cloud server and be in full control of your own data. You'll need something to host your own home server on. So I like to buy used laptops. I bought a ThinkPad T440 for my own home server at 8 gigs of RAM. Probably see it in the background behind me, underneath the television. It's that way, yeah. And I plugged the 6 terabyte external USB hard drive into it to expand the storage, and it's great. I don't like to use Raspberry Pis for servers. I've got 3 Raspberry Pis. I use them for other things, but some people use them for servers. But I like to have just one really decent spec laptop to do everything, rather than you end up having to use multiple Raspberry Pis, and they're really not that powerful. Even the Raspberry Pi 4 or the the Pine boards, they're not ideal for servers if you want to do host multiple things on them. And static IP, I'd recommend, if you can get a static IP from your ISP, I recommend you do that, or change to an ISP that does let you do that if that's possible. My ISP just charged me a one-time $20 to get a static IP, and I don't have to pay anything else to keep that static IP ever again. So I have that static IP forever. Yeah, I'd highly recommend getting a domain name for your own home server, and you'll have multiple subdomains for your various services you host in your own home. And that way you can also secure your websites and services with SSL. Now, if you can't get a static IP, you can get a dynamic DNS. And I'd still recommend getting your own domain name. So find a dynamic DNS service that lets you have your own domain name, and find one that also lets you do SSL with your own domain name. Now, I don't know how well SSL works with a dynamic DNS service, because I've never tried it. But if it works, I'd highly recommend doing it. And so for our own home server, we will be using CentOS and Virtualmin. CentOS is the community version of the Red Hat distro, and Virtualmin is a complete administration console which works in your web browser. So you'll be able to completely manage your server through Virtualmin. So once you've installed Virtualmin, you'll very rarely have to use the terminal. And we'll have a quick look at Virtualmin before I go through the tutorial. Another great thing about Virtualmin is it's similar to cPanel. You can create virtual servers. Like, say you wanted to host a website for a friend or family member, but they wanted to create it and work on it themselves. You can create a login for Virtualmin for them, but they'll only be able to administrate their virtual server. Virtualmin installs a full LAMP stack. So it'll install PHP, Apache, SQL, everything that's needed for a web server. And in future videos, we will use Virtualmin to also do reverse proxies into Docker containers. For example, let's say maybe Nextcloud might require a Docker container for an app, and like Collabora, which is like a Google Docs collaborative editor in your web browser. So here's Virtualmin, and as you can see, as soon as you log in, you get lots of information. So we get CPU consumption, memory consumption, disk space consumption. Get even more information down here. As you can see, it tells me that I need to do some updates. Now if I scroll down, I can see recent logins, disk quotas, which is you can set up plans, and for each plan you can set up rules, like the amount of disk space each virtual server on that plan can use, whether they're allowed to use SSL, and all sorts of different rules. We won't completely go through this right now. It's just a quick preview of Virtualmin. And there's another tab here. which lets you change all the various settings on your server and configurations for different things. And Virtualmin doesn't just install a full LAMP stack, it also installs various other useful services and things you need to administrate your home server and keep it secure. So it installs fail to ban and ClamAV. So fail to ban prevents intruders. So basically, if they fail to authenticate against something too many times, whether it be SSH or a patch logging into a website, their IP will get banned for a certain amount of time, and they won't be able to do anything further. I think the default is 3 failures and their IP gets banned. And fail to ban allows you to set up like a whitelist so that you don't accidentally ban yourself, or you can just say never ban anyone on my home network. That way you'll never lock yourself out of it and have to physically go to your server and unban yourself. So for the home server setup, we'll be using CentOS minimal. We will need, at the moment, the latest CentOS is CentOS 8, but that doesn't have a minimal install yet. And for this, we'll want a minimal install, ideally. So I'm going to click here and go alternative downloads. And then here we can see CentOS version 7. And we can go mirrors. As you see, minimal is available. Okay. Then we can click into any of these mirrors. Here's minimal. So I can grab that. CentOS 7 is still supported, so it's no worries. For installing it on actual hardware, you'll probably want to have a USB stick and create a bootable USB of that ISO you download. There are multiple programs to do this. If you're on Windows, I think Rufus will create a bootable USB from that ISO. And if you're on like Ubuntu or something like that, there are other programs. On Ubuntu, there's the Ubuntu Startup Disk Creator, which will work. Okay, so for this tutorial, I will be installing on a virtual machine. I'm not reinstalling it on my hardware. I've got other people's websites and stuff hosted on there. So here we can go install CentOS 7 UK English. Oh, I could have chose New Zealand English. Oops, now it's changed the keyboard. I want the keyboard to be US. There we go. Let's remove the UK keyboard. Otherwise my keys are all going to be messed up. And let's change that because we know that there's a New Zealand option there. And I can't unselect UK. Well, we've got both languages now. Okay. Then we need to select our installation location. So we'll select the correct hard drive. And we'll let it automatically do the partitioning. Okay.
Make sure to turn the network interface on.
And just go begin installation. Here we can set the root password. And we'll just have a root account. We won't set up a user. So we'll just wait for it to finish installing and then we'll continue. Okay, now it's finished. We can just click the reboot button on the bottom right. First thing we probably will need to do is just enable SSH. Take a moment to boot up. There we go. So now we can log in. Okay, it's SSHD. Okay, so now that SSH is enabled, we should be able to access this remotely, which will be very useful. So if you wanted to go back to your desktop or another computer, you could put your virtual server away, and we can do the rest through SSH remotely. Okay, so in order to actually SSH into the machine, you'll need its IP address. if you choose to use SSH from now on. Or you can continue working on the physical machine, it's up to you. So you just do IPA, and then there you get its IP address. As you see, I got 192.168.1.36. From now on, I'm going to use SSH, because this is how I would do it. Usually because I host my servers on laptops and my eyesight's bad, so I prefer to, once I've got SSH access, come to my nice big monitor and be able to use that in a nice terminal emulator where I can do this. That just makes life easier. So if you're not on Linux, then you probably don't have it. If you're on Windows, you probably don't have a terminal. Now, you can use SSH for PowerShell, but I've heard it's buggy. So there's a program called Putty you can use to SSH into your machine. And if you're on Mac, you have a terminal just like you would on Linux. So you just open up the terminal and SSH into your machine that way. So you want to go to Virtualmin, and then you can click try Virtualmin. And then here there'll be the GPL version, which is the one you want. That's nice and copyleft and open source. Just do what it says here. There's instructions. If you don't have wget, you can actually install it. You go yum, install wget. Yum is the package manager on CentOS. And it'll say how much disk space it's going to use. Great. So now we can go. What was the name of that file we just downloaded? Install. Okay. And we can run this script, which will set up Virtualmin. Now this script will try to do as much as it can by itself. So here it will say enter in a host name. Now remember I mentioned you should register a domain name. This is where you would enter it. I haven't registered this, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll pretend I have. And when it's finished, you should see it's installed a full LAMP stack, as well as a bunch of other useful tools and services. So it says you can go to the web console of IP address or domain name. To configure it for your domain name, you have to do it on your router. Every router is different. I can't really go over how to do it on every single router out there. I use open source firmware, Tomato, and this is how you would configure it on Tomato. So you would have to refer to your own router's documentation if you wish to access it this way. And now, of course, the first time you're going to get a security warning. That's because the certificate's not signed yet. So we can go advanced, accept the risk, and continue. And here you can log in as root using the same as you set up for CentOS. And you should be able to finish your install in here, post installation wizard. So I got a pop-up here that says allow notifications. I find the notifications in Virtualmin useful, so I always allow the notifications. You probably didn't see that part because I'm only capturing my browser, not the pop-ups and notifications I get through Firefox. Okay, so let's click next. Memory usage. Now this of course will depend on your hardware, and it also depends how many users are on at the exact same time. Like if you've got lots of users but they're not on at the exact same time, you're probably safe to say yes, use more RAM. Now I don't use the mail servers that often, so for mail I'll leave it on no. Now I'm not going to do a lot with mail, so I just said no to that. I prefer MariaDB, so I'll use MariaDB. And I don't want Postgres. And we can change that password later. We'll just delete that database that I was talking about. Now, if this is just a home server, you host a few websites for friends and family and stuff like that, probably go with medium. Again, it depends on the hardware you're using. If you don't have a lot of RAM in there, then maybe you'll want to set it to small, but I've got plenty of RAM. Right, so here you want to put in your primary name server. So this will depend on which domain register you registered your domain. And because I haven't registered this domain, then, well, there's nothing I can really put in there, but I can skip the check. Otherwise this will fail. So we can, for example, it'll be like ns1 godaddy.com. But that's not the case here, so I'm just going to change it to tuxfurdomain.org, because you can this actually is running its own domain name server. So if you wanted to, you could use that, but I'd recommend using the one that your domain name register provides you, which is annoying because every time you set up a new virtual server or service, you'll have to go into your domain register and add that new subdomain. But that's more secure. Or you can wildcard all subdomains. Of course, storing plain text passwords is not a good idea. So hashed passwords, yep, definitely. Yeah, so if you want disk quotas, then definitely disk quotas are very useful. That way, if you're hosting a website for someone else, you can set a quota. And post installation completed. Okay, so now we need to configure our DNS records. Now, it's different on every single domain name register, so you have to refer to their documentation. But you'll pretty much need A-name records and C-name records. You can also use the DNS server that Virtualmin installed by configuring the settings on your domain name register, but you would have to open up port 53 and configure that on your domain name register. It's probably just better to use the one that your domain name register provides. So you need a name record. So you just do it and then put in your static IP. Now, if you're using a dynamic DNS, that you'll have to refer to their documentation. You need a CName record. Now, you can do things like this. So let's say we had a subdomain Nextcloud, and then we would go, so then we can wildcard it like this. Oops. My typing's off today. And, oh, of course you need to do that. There we go. But I think what we'll do today is we'll just wildcard all subdomains, which will make signing our SSL certificate really easy. So you'll want to configure port forwarding on your router. Again, it'll just different on every router, so you have to refer to your own router's documentation on port forwarding. But 2 ports are important. In our case, port 80 and port 443. So port 80 is unsigned websites, and port 443 is websites signed by SSL. And you'll want to forward that to whatever IP address that your router has given your server. And on your router, you'll want to make that device, which your server is on, a static IP so that that IP address never changes. So it stays the same so that those ports are always getting forwarded to your server. Now, other ports you might want to consider, if you want to use FTP, you want to configure those ports. I won't go into that now. And mail, if you want want it to receive incoming mail. You won't need it to send outgoing mail. For example, you set up some sort of service that sends verification emails. You won't need to configure anything for that. But there are some settings you want to change in the DNS records if you don't want that mail to go into their spam. And you might want to open up port 10,000, but have it incoming port. Just change it to a random port for incoming. For example, that. Then go to 192.168.1.36. Like, you want to do something like that, because that port's too obvious. It's a common port that people know, so you just change it to something uncommon. It just makes it a teeny bit more secure. Okay, let's create our first virtual server and secure it with SSL using the registered domain name. So as you see, I've already created one. I've probably blurred it out, but click create virtual server. Now you'll put in the domain name you registered, and then under enable features, click set up SSL website too. And there's nothing else that needs to be entered. So click continue, and it should create this virtual server for me. And you can also use this to create subservers and stuff which aren't accessible via the internet. You would have to set up that on your router though. So you don't actually have to register a domain name unless you want it secured by SSL, then you will have to register a domain name. Okay, in order to secure the website via SSL, we'll have to go into server configuration, SSL certificate. Then there should be a tab that says Let's Encrypt. And in here, you can either click domains listed here, because you can actually sign subdomains, like for example, www, that's the default. And then you'd click request certificate. Mine's already signed, so I'm not going to do that. Now, if your DNS records have not been propagated yet, this will fail if you've only just added in the DNS records. To check the progress on that, you can go to like dnschecker.org, and then in here you'd go like this, and it would do a quick search to see if that domain name is propagated yet on various DNS servers around the world. So if your SSL cert fails, this might be a likely cause, and you'll just have to wait a few hours for it to propagate. You can force redirection to the secure version of your websites that you create in Virtualmin by going into Services, Configure Website, not Configure SSL. Then you'll find aliases and redirects. And now in from and URL redirects, you just do something like this. Oops. There you go. Now that will be redirected to HTTPS. And you'll do the same thing in permanent URL redirects. Another cool feature that Virtualmin has, which I'll quickly show you, is if you scroll down to the bottom here on the left, see that? There's a terminal. which you can use straight from your web browser. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, now let's create another virtual server and then log in as that user. So we'll click create virtual server and we'll change the password because this will be another user. Let's say you create a virtual server for someone else. This is a pretty weak password, but this will be deleted in a second. And we can go Bob's server and description, and then just click create. Okay, so if we try to go to this new virtual server we created, as you see it says forbidden. This is because there's no index page yet. So let's log in as the new user that was created when we created the virtual server. Whoops, that's not it, is it? There we go. As you see, they have much less options available, which is good because you don't want other people messing up your server. There's a file manager and it still gives them plenty of options. They can edit their SQL databases and all sorts of things. They can even add other FTP users to their virtual server. So they do get FTP access, that is if you open up the ports for them. But for now, let's go to the file manager and we will create a new file. We'll call it index.html. Then we will edit it and we'll just, there we go. Now let's save it and then refresh the page. There you go. Hello world. Okay, so that does it for Virtualmin and CentOS for your home server. In future videos like Nextcloud, we will use this. I haven't done any tutorial stuff like this before as videos, so we'll see how it turns out or whether it was helpful to anyone. Anyways, thank you for watching. See you later.